Hi, guys, this is Mr. Ryder, and you're listening and watching the lesson from Friday, March 13th. And yesterday we just got done talking about the two different major cell types. We talked about things that all cells have in common, and that would be the plasma membrane or the cell membrane. We talked about the fact that all cells have genes made of DNA, that all cells have ribosomes that make protein, and all cells have cytoplasm. There are two major types of cells. The first type is called a prokaryotic cell. Prokaryotic cells lack a nucleus, and that's pretty much the biggest thing to know about them. And only bacteria are prokaryotes. They're very, very simple organisms, and they're always unicellular. Here's a picture of a bacterial cell, also known as a prokaryotic cell. We talked about some of its parts yesterday. And then we went in and talked about eukaryotic cells. So remember, eukaryotic cells are more complex, and the main thing to know is that they have a nucleus that houses their DNA. They also have fancy organelles that each perform a different function. If you're not dealing with a bacteria, you're dealing with a eukaryotic organism, such as an animal, a plant, a protist, or a fungus. We looked at a couple of pictures of eukaryotic cells. Here was our picture of an animal cell. Here was our picture of a plant cell. And then we started talking about some more cell parts specific to eukaryotic cells. And this is where the handout that you got yesterday, you were supposed to fill in the blanks. There's more on my desk. We talked about a cell wall. A cell wall protects the cell. It surrounds the cell membrane. It's made of a material called cellulose. Animal cells do not have cell walls, but plant cells do, and fungal cells do, and all bacterial cells do as well. We talked about the nucleus and how DNA takes different forms. DNA can be unwound in the form of chromatin or tightly coiled in the form of a chromosome. And the main thing to know about the nucleus is that it controls all cellular activities. We then talked about the endomembrane system, which is a bunch of related organelles that all work together eventually to produce proteins for the cell. So we talked about this picture in which we're looking at a cell. This is the cell membrane. This is outside the cell. You can see some of the pieces of chromatin, the DNA in here. And so the message for building any protein will be locked up in the DNA, and that message makes its way out to a ribosome in blue here on the rough ER. The ribosome makes the protein, sends it off in a vesicle after it modifies the protein to the Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus kind of stamps it and gives it the final approval, and it sends it off to its final destination. So some proteins exit the cell, they're secretory proteins. Some proteins stay inside of the cell. We talked about the smooth ER. Smooth ER lacks ribosomes, and one of its biggest functions is to transport substances, and it also makes lipids for cells. We talked about the rough ER and how it's very important in that endomembrane system. It's got ribosomes on it, and the ribosomes help to produce these proteins such as insulin and glycoproteins. The Golgi apparatus is made of flattened sacs, and basically they get the proteins that travel from the ER in vesicles, and they mark these proteins and they sort them and they get them ready to go to their final destinations. They're nicknamed the mailroom of the cell because anything that has to leave the cell has to go through the Golgi apparatus. We ended yesterday talking about lysosomes. Lysosomes are organelles that contain digestive enzymes, and you wouldn't find lysosomes in plant cells. And they're actually part of, these lysosomes are made by the endomembrane system. And they're compartments of proteins that happen to be enzymes that never left the cell in the first place. And so there are 4 different functions that lysosomes serve. They can help break down food vacuoles and protists. We'll take a look at a picture of that. They work inside of our white blood cells to break down bacteria and other disease-causing particles such as coronaviruses that our cells would um, come in contact with. So that's a very important function. They help to recycle damaged parts within cells, and they also play a pretty important role in embryonic development. This is my favorite function of lysosomes. Early on in development, when you're still in the embryonic stage, but you have limbs that have formed, your digits or your fingers are all connected by fleshy tissue. The cells in between your fingers actually rupture their lysosomes, and all those digestive enzymes cause that tissue to die between your fingers, and that's what allows your fingers to become separate. So without lysosomes, your hand would, you'd have basically a webbed hand. This is a picture of a white blood cell called a macrophage that is engulfing a bacteria that could potentially be harmful, and then fusing its lysosome with the digestive enzymes here in yellow, and the enzymes break down the bacteria so you don't have to worry about it. So very important in the body. This is a picture of a cell that looks like it's eating a piece of algae. Maybe this is an amoeba. It's engulfing the piece of algae, and this food vacuole actually gets broken down by a lysosome that has digestive enzymes in it. There are diseases that are centered around lysosomes. Some people are missing one or more of these enzymes inside of their lysosomes. So two examples of these diseases would be Pompei's disease, which affects muscle and liver cells, and then Tay-Sachs disease, which affects nerve cells. So both are pretty serious diseases that are resulting from a person not making enough or any enzymes in their lysosomes. A vacuole is something that all eukaryotic cells have. And basically, vacuum, that's a root word that means void or empty space. And so these are storage sacs that cells can store different things in. A lot of times, cells store water, waste, and other vital chemicals. Plants have one big central vacuole, whereas animals have multiple smaller vacuoles. Some cells, like this unicellular paramecium, it's a type of protist, little tiny protist that lives in the Broadhead Creek or the Delaware River. They have contractile vacuoles. They look like little suns here that pump water out of cells to keep the water level constant within the cell. And so that's part of homeostasis or maintaining stable internal conditions. This is another organelle called the chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are only in photosynthetic cells, so animal cells lack chloroplasts, and it's the place that photosynthesis happens. If you look inside, there's actually two membranes, an outer and an inner membrane, and plant cells are packed with these chloroplasts. Inside of the chloroplast, you find these green discs called thylakoids, and the thylakoids have green pigments called chloroplasts that can absorb the light energy from the sun and use that energy to produce sugar. This is how chloroplast actually looks down below there. This is a very important organelle called the mitochondria. This is the plural name. Mitochondria means multiple mitochondrion. And this is the place where cellular respiration happens. And it's basically the opposite of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis produces sugar. And if we're talking about a plant cell, in that same plant cell, the sugar gets sent to the mitochondrion, kind of a kidney bean shaped structure, where that sugar energy, which is a type of chemical energy, is converted and broken down into another type of chemical energy called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP for short. We'll talk more about that later on in the semester. So all eukaryotic cells have mitochondria, including our cells, and they're very important. Muscle cells have several mitochondria because muscle cells need to make lots of ATP. Centrioles are organelles that look like clusters of coffee straws almost. And really all that you need to know right now about centrioles is that they aid in cell division. There's two types of cell divisions that happen in cells, in eukaryotic cells. One is called mitosis, and that's the story of how new body cells are made. like liver cells and kidney cells and skin cells. And then there's a cell division called meiosis, which is the story of how sex cells are produced, such as sperm cells and egg cells. You only find centrioles in animal cells, not in plant cells. And then this is a theory, and it's a really interesting theory. It's called the endosymbiotic theory. And basically what it is it says that at one point on Earth, only prokaryotes existed. And the theory suggests that all of these organelles stemmed from specialized either photosynthetic prokaryotes, bacteria, or heterotrophic bacteria that started to live inside of other larger ancestral prokaryotes. And then after a while, when the cell divided, it actually made copies of these um, bacterial cells. And then through evolution, cells just were born with these organelles in them. So there's lots of evidence to support this. Both chloroplasts and mitochondria have their own DNA. And guess what? They're the same size as many bacteria. So there's many people that suggest that organelles came from bacteria that were specialized that started living within other bacteria, and kind of life was better together. There's a little video clip down here that you can watch that kind of goes through this as well. I suggest watching it. But it's called the endosymbiotic theory. Endo means inside. Symbiotic means living together or helping each other. And that's exactly what organelles do. They live within cells, or they are located within cells, and their jobs are really important for the overall function of a cell. Cytoskeleton. Cyto means cell. And I'm sure we all know what a skeleton is. It provides support and structure. So cytoskeletons are made out of protein fibers, really, really strong fibers, and they extend all throughout the cytoplasm, and they provide structural support, and they allow cell parts to move within the cell. There's 3 types of cytoskeleton components. This one's called microtubules. So micro means small, tubule means tube, small tubes. This is called an intermediate filament, and this is called a microfilament. Micro means small, and filament means strand. And so combination of these 3 make up the cytoskeleton. If we look at a cross-section of a cell, we always have this illusion that there's, again, lots of empty space and things are just floating around in a cell. And it's far from that. There's actually that cytoplasm kind of holds and locks in all of these organelles for the cell. So you can see the microtubules in blue here that are extending through the cell. You can see microfilaments kind of reinforcing the cell membrane. And you can see these intermediate filaments in green that kind of offer a grid or kind of a supportive structures for these organelles so they don't just sink to the bottom of the cell. Some cells move. So some cells have what are known as cilia. Cilia are tiny little hair-like structures that flutter in a specific way, and it allows the cell to move. These little hair-like structures are made of proteins. Some cells have flagella, which are long whip-like projections that help the cell to move as well. Regardless if a cell is going to move, it's going to require that ATP energy that was made in cellular respiration. Cell surfaces. The surface of a cell is really important. You can see that these plant cells down here are coated with a sticky polysaccharide. And this sticky polysaccharide kind of acts as the mortar that keeps adjacent cells kind of stuck together, kind of pastes them together. And then there are what are called cell junctions. And the cell junction of a plant cell is called a plasmodesmatum. Multiple plasmodesmatum are called plasmodesmata. And basically, these are kind of just pipelines from cell to cell. And so this cell here can produce products or any material, protein, whatever, and share it with its adjacent cell. And the same thing goes for over here. So it allows the circulation of materials and also for cells to communicate with one another. Animal cells also have a sticky substance on their exterior, and these are called glycoproteins, and they hold cells together. And they're also connected by junctions. And so there are three different types of junctions. There are tight junctions, which really bind cells together really, really tight, and that produces a leak-proof surface. So you can imagine the lining of your digestive tract, right? Your esophagus, your stomach, your intestines are made of cells that are really, really stitched together tightly by these tight junctions. And then there are anchoring junctions that are almost like little tiny rivets that make really, really strong connections between cells. Skin cells, heart cells, muscle tissue are joined like that. And then there are gap junctions, which are a lot like those plasmodesmata that allow cells, animal cells, to exchange materials with one another. And so that's really important as well. So if you look at this picture, it's showing you some anchoring junctions, which are really, really, really strong. It's showing you some tight junctions, again, really, really strong. And it's showing you some gap junctions, which allow these cells to share materials. And then finally, I just wanted to mention something about structure and function. The structure is how something is shaped, and the function is what it does, what job it performs. And so it's a common theme through biology that the structure or the shape of an object is really important to its function. Think about the shape of a flower and the color of a flower, and how that color and shape specifically attract certain pollinators to help with reproduction. In cells, it's the same way. Organelles that work towards similar functions have similar shapes. So the ER and the Golgi, they look very, very similar because they're helping proteins move around the cell in those vesicles. Chloroplasts and mitochondria, they look very similar. They're both involved in transforming some type of energy into another. Chloroplast transforms light energy into sugar, and mitochondria transports or transfers the energy of sugar molecules into ATP molecules. And so if we liken this to cells, this is a neuron or a nerve cell. Nerve cells are shaped differently than blood cells. The job of a nerve cell is to carry an electrical impulse to another nerve cell. So they're perfectly designed to do that with these long dendrites. Blood cells have a completely different function. They have to be able to move throughout the entire body in every single vein and vesicle and artery. And so they have to be smooth. They have to be very, very small. They're some of the small cells in your body, because otherwise, if they were shaped like nerve cells, they would get stuck on one another. So these two cells really are an example of the structure of a cell fitting its specific function. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys off to do your web quest. You can go back and look at these notes at any time and make sure that you do fill them in. And I will see you all on Monday. Thank you very much.